Entering the ICU to see his fading wife after a medical consultation, the husband gave his lover an expensive necklace, but he was in for a surprise. Miriam Taylor slowly opened her eyes, or at least tried to. Her throat was parched, and she felt an unbearable thirst. She wanted to move, but her body refused to obey. Her arms and legs felt like they were filled with lead, remaining still. God, where am I, and why am I in this state? Flashed through her mind. Panic, cold and sticky like a snake, began to creep through her body. Her muscles immediately protested, sending signals of agonizing pain to her brain. Miriam clenched her teeth, trying to suppress a groan. The room was bright, white walls and ceiling. The air smelled sharply of disinfectant, mixed with the faint scent of medicine. In the corner, a monitor flickered faintly, showing the steady rhythm of an electrocardiogram. Each flash of green light marked another moment of her existence, in sync with her heartbeat. The room was quiet, broken only by the hum of medical equipment and the noise from the ventilation system. Through the haze of fog, Miriam began to make out figures standing by her bed. One of them was a man in his mid-40s, maybe older. His rounded belly, which even the suit couldn't hide, the starched collar of his shirt, and the scent of cologne, French, probably from a limited collection. Expensive watch on his wrist. The watch. She had seen it before. Of course, she had personally bought it for her husband's wedding anniversary. Extremely expensive. Pure gold. It was Sam, her husband. Next to him, like a shadow, stood a woman she didn't recognize. Who is that? A medical worker? Doesn't seem like it. Looks much younger than Sam. How old is she? 30, 35? She looks good. Much better than me. Hardly any wrinkles. Unlike me, thought Miriam, still unsure of what to do next. Her heart clenched with inner pain. Could she have really missed something important? Fortunately, the visitors hadn't noticed she was waking up and were talking amongst themselves, unaware of her fluttering eyelids. She was always so smart, so driven, but sadly, age has taken its toll, Sam remarked softly. Miriam gritted her teeth, struggling to hold back a sob. Age? She was only 48. And Sam? Just 2 years younger, yet he was speaking about her as if she were an old woman. Meanwhile, the woman beside him, pressing her whole body against him, whispered gently. It's a pity, but the key word in your sentences was. You know, I always believed you deserved better and deserved to be happy, darling. Miriam felt the blood rush to her face, her cheeks burning with anger and pain. She could clearly hear Sam cooing sweetly to this little thing, planning his new life, oblivious to the fact that Miriam could hear and understand everything. You're right, Betty, he replied, gently stroking her back. I've deserved this for a long time. I suffered for so many years, endured so much, but now it's all over, a fresh start. I'm taking control and moving forward. Sam, you don't need to worry so much. I'm always here to support you, Betty said softly. At that moment, Sam smiled mysteriously and pulled a velvet box from his jacket pocket. Miriam watched as Sam eagerly opened it, revealing a dazzling, sparkling necklace to Betty. This is for you, darling, for always being by my side, he said, hugging his lover. I never loved her. It was just a habit. Miriam shuddered. She suddenly wanted to scream, to throw herself at them, to tell them how much she had loved him and how selflessly she had dedicated her life to him. For 20 years, she had fought for their family, for the love that he now so easily denied and trampled on. Oh, thank you. It's so beautiful, gasped Betty, admiring the necklace with awe. It will always remind me of your love. I want you to know, you're the only one I love, Sam said, unable to contain himself, hugging her like an overexcited teenager on a first date. Miriam closed her eyes, barely holding back her tears. It was a good thing that her husband and his lover had moved closer to the center of the room and couldn't see her face now. She couldn't believe how quickly it had all ended. Her family life had crumbled in just a few minutes. We should go, Sam said, reluctantly pulling away from Betty. I feel a little awkward, you know. After all, I was the one who insisted during the consultation on turning off Miriam's life support. They gave her another day, and then that's it. I think she'll even thank me for it. Why live like a vegetable? You're right. I think the same. But how did your son react? Betty asked as gently as possible, playfully biting her lip. What about William? He's on the other side of the country, finishing university. And besides, he's not our biological son, he's adopted. But I've always thought of him as my own, and so did Miriam. We took him in from an orphanage after Miriam had a miscarriage. So, it's not really an issue. William fully supports me. Especially after finding out what he'll inherit from the will. I told Miriam even before the surgery, this won't work. The disease is incurable. But she was stubborn. She resisted and refused to accept it. And here we are now. She's lying there like a mummy. Betty nodded in agreement. She had never been particularly interested in her lover's family dynamics before, and now even less so. What mattered most was that the bank account was always full and that Sam visited her from time to time. Soon, the lovers left, and the door quietly closed behind them. Miriam exhaled in relief. For a moment, she thought they might have heard the frantic beating of her heart. Once the room was empty, Miriam was finally able to open her eyes and look around. All right, it's fine, I'll get through this. But my son, he's no better. Without understanding the situation, he approved his father's decision. To disconnect his own mother from life support? And what have I ever done to you, William? How many cars have you crashed in the past year? 3, 4, maybe 5? Of course, an unlimited credit card in your pocket, why not have fun? God himself would approve. And what about the criminal case after you beat up that bartender? The smashed window? You only transferred to another city to avoid my lectures. But maybe it's my own fault. Did I torment him too much with my moralizing? Miriam began to doubt herself. At that moment, Miriam realized her life had changed forever. She was no longer the woman she once was. She felt crushed, humiliated, and betrayed, but along with that, a new strength was born within her, full of determination to survive, persevere, and punish those who had betrayed her. The door to her room opened, and a man around 25 years old entered. He was wearing the green uniform of a hospital orderly, and his badge read Jeff. Seeing that the patient had regained consciousness, he gasped in surprise. You're awake? I thought you were already gone. Miriam managed a weary smile and even attempted a joke. The rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Jeff smiled, but his face suddenly darkened. You see, your husband spoke at the medical consultation and said that since you'd been unconscious for several days after the surgery, it would be better to disconnect you. But not everyone agreed with him. Can you imagine? The opinions were split, almost 50-50. The deciding vote was cast by a new doctor, one of the foreign exchange specialists. He said they should wait. So, in a way, you got lucky. And the surgery was personally performed by the department head. You could say he pulled you back from the brink. My husband wanted to disconnect me? Miriam mumbled weakly. But why? Sam said that since you were in a coma, there was no point in keeping you alive and wasting money, Jeff replied awkwardly, as if ashamed on her husband's behalf. Miriam felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat as the harsh truth hit her. Sam wanted to get rid of her, to be with his lover. I'm feeling a little better, Miriam whispered. I can hear and understand everything. Jeff averted his eyes, as though unable to bear the truth of the situation. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Edwin, he said into the phone, the patient, Miriam Taylor, has woken up. Yes, from the coma. She's fully aware of her surroundings. No need for the ICU team. Yes, I'm sure. After hanging up, Jeff walked over to her bed. The doctor will be here soon. He'll explain everything to you. Miriam nodded, But her thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions: anger, hurt, disbelief. Her husband, the man she had spent the last 20 years with, had wanted to get rid of her like a toy that had grown old and boring. Soon, Dr. Edwin Thomas entered the room. "Miriam," Edwin said, addressing her, "I'm glad you've woken up. Your condition is stable, but it will take some time for you to recover. I'll be completely honest with you, you've pleasantly surprised me. To be frank, not many expected a positive outcome. Fortunately, I wasn't among them. Jeff can confirm that." Miriam smiled faintly and quietly said, "I'm very grateful to you, but I have one request. I understand it may sound absurd or strange, but could you keep my recovery a secret for now? Just for a little while, so my husband doesn't know." The head doctor frowned, exchanging a discreet glance with Jeff, who was standing at attention. "Well, I think I can grant your request. I can't promise to keep it quiet for too long, but I'll guarantee a couple of days. Focus on getting better and rest more. I'll assign Jeff to look after you. He's the best orderly in the department, actually, in the whole clinic. Could have gone for a master swimmer, but chose this path." At the doctor's words, Jeff lowered his gaze in embarrassment, while Miriam smiled at the tall, kind young man. Handsome, no doubt about that. Ah, youth. Once, Miriam had been just like that. Though time goes on, she was nearly 49 now. Not that old, really. People say life begins at 40 for a reason. Edwin left the room. Jeff lingered a moment longer, then quietly followed, moving with surprising grace for his height. Miriam smiled as she watched him tiptoe out. Sam used to be like that too, tall, broad-shouldered. But now, his belly resembled a globe. Still, he had added an air of importance, gained more confidence. He looked like he should be running a factory at the very least, yet he remained in her shadow. Because, really, nothing serious could be entrusted to him. One of those cases where there's plenty of ambition but little result. Send him to negotiate a business deal, and he'd surely ruin it, get drunk and start arguments, undoing all of Miriam's hard work. But she didn't hold it against him. To each their own, as they say. Some people are born to run a business, others are not. And then there was William. He seemed to be trying, wanting to succeed. But the moment he stepped into a nightclub, it was like he lost his mind. Throwing money around, partying recklessly. Why hold back? His parents were far away, no one to scold him, and money fixed everything. As long as Mom kept covering his debts. Miriam understood this all too well and had often told herself to stop spoiling him. Let him start earning for himself, like she had in her youth. She had never had a moment's rest, dealing with thugs, extortion, back alley meetings. She didn't even want to remember. William had no idea what that was like. His life now was paradise. How did that famous saying go? Hard times create strong people. It was true, every word. Lying in the hospital bed, Miriam closed her eyes in bliss, letting herself sink into memories. It was funny, she might finally get some rest here, for the first time in ages. She'd carried the weight of everything: business, family, home. The memories of her childhood, her youth, and her love surfaced vividly, as if they had all happened yesterday. Miriam saw herself again as a little girl running down a sun-drenched forest path. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. And beside her was her father, a tall, sturdy man with kind eyes and a scratchy, geologist-like beard on his chin. Derek Ellis, her beloved father, a forestry worker, and a man whose name still filled her heart with reverence. "Dad, what kind of bird is that?" little Miriam asked, pointing at a bright bird perched on a branch. "That's a tit, my dear," Derek replied with a smile. "It's a very useful bird. It helps protect the forest by keeping harmful insects in check." Miriam loved these walks. Her father always told her fascinating stories about the forest creatures, the trees, and how important it was to take care of nature. His voice was soothing, like a lullaby, and his strong, warm hands made her feel safe. Their home stood on the edge of a small village surrounded by dense forest. It was a small wooden house with carved window frames and a lush flower garden by the porch. It was filled with love and the warmth of daily life. Her mother worked as a cook in the factory's cafeteria, traveling there by train every day. Miriam often helped her in the kitchen, watching how skillfully her mother turned simple ingredients into culinary masterpieces. The smell of freshly baked bread, mushroom soup, and fried potatoes, that was the smell of childhood, the smell of home, which still warmed her soul. "Miriam, could you help me, please?" her mother would say, setting a bowl of flour in front of her. "We need to knead the dough for the potato pies." And Miriam gladly helped, becoming more skilled in the kitchen with every attempt. But childhood was clouded by a terrible event. When she was 7, a forest fire broke out, overwhelming in its size. The relentless flames devoured the trees as if they were dry reeds rather than century-old pines and oaks. Her father, as a forester, rushed to help, saving people and animals in the nature reserve. But the fire was stronger, and soon there was a real threat that it would reach the village. Understanding that time was running out, Derek jumped into a tractor and began plowing and harrowing the ground around the village to stop the fire from spreading. It was a desperate but effective measure, especially since the fire trucks had been sent elsewhere. Death took the young forester behind the wheel of the tractor just as he finished the final furrow. "Daddy! Daddy!" Little, fragile Miriam clung to her mother's skirt, tears streaming down her face, offering no relief. Her mother, barely holding herself together, hugged Miriam tightly, trying to soothe her pain. The loss of the family's pillar left a deep wound in both their hearts, a wound that would never fully heal. After her father's tragic death, Miriam's life changed. There was more silence, more loneliness. Her mother worked tirelessly, without weekends, trying to provide a decent life for them, but Miriam missed her father terribly. She longed for his warm hands, his kind words. School became a place where she found new friends and immersed herself in the world of learning. But this new life brought one challenge that troubled Miriam deeply, making her feel awkward and insecure. After her father's death, she began to stutter. What's the next lesson?" she would ask, trying to form the sentence, but the words tangled, stumbling out and provoking giggles and whispers from her classmates. She felt so ashamed, so hurt, so embarrassed. She started avoiding conversations, sitting alone during breaks, feeling like an outsider and deeply isolated. "Miriam, don't worry," said her class teacher, Linda Robbins, a kind and wise woman. "You're a smart and talented girl. This is just a small challenge that you will definitely overcome." Mrs. Linda suggested seeing a speech therapist, and with her mother's support, Miriam found the strength to try. In the office of Nancy Pittman, a pleasant woman with a soft voice, Miriam felt much calmer. The therapist patiently taught her how to breathe properly, articulate sounds, do exercises, and read aloud. "Don't rush, Miriam," Nancy would say with a smile. "You'll get there. The most important thing is to believe in yourself." And Miriam tried to believe, working hard, gradually overcoming her fear of stuttering. During one of the sessions, she met Donald, a boy who also stuttered like she did. He was her age, slim, with dark hair and freckles scattered across his nose and cheeks. "Didon." "Donald," he introduced himself, struggling to pronounce his name. "I'm Miriam," she replied, for the first time feeling that she wasn't alone, that there was someone who understood her, who felt the same as she did. Donald and Miriam became friends, working with the speech therapist together, overcoming their difficulties side by side, and celebrating their small victories. "Miriam, do you like to read?" Donald asked one day as they left Nancy's office. "Yes, very much. I love books about adventures, love, and distant journeys." "I like poetry," Donald said. "I want to learn how to write poems myself." "You will." "I'm sure of it," Miriam smiled. Between them, a feeling began to bloom, something they couldn't yet understand or describe. It was something bright, warm, and mysterious. Something known as first love. "Miriam, "You're so beautiful," Donald said one day, blushing with embarrassment. "Thank you, that's so sweet of you." "And you're kind," Miriam replied, her heart beating faster. Soon, their friendship blossomed into tender feelings. They met secretly in the park, walked hand in hand, read poetry to each other, and dreamed of the future. Miriam, who had recently felt so lonely, now felt like the happiest girl in the world. Thanks to Donald, she believed in herself, in her beauty, and in her ability to love and be loved. Unfortunately, happiness can be fragile, like the thin ice of spring. One summer evening, as they sat on a park bench, Donald told her that his family was moving to another city. "Miriam, I don't know what will happen next," Donald began, his voice trembling. "We may never see each other again." "Don't say that," Miriam whispered, tears filling her eyes. "We'll write letters to each other and never forget each other." "Yes," Donald agreed, "we'll write letters. And we can send each other packages too, like books and birthday gifts." Their parting was agonizing. Miriam was left with a deep sense of longing and emptiness. After they separated, she poured her heart into writing Donald letters, telling him everything about her life, her studies, her friends, and the new man in her mother's life. But the responses became less frequent, and with each one, there was less warmth, less of the love they had once shared. Time passed. Miriam grew up, finished school, and went on to university. She tried to forget Donald, but his image lingered in her thoughts, and his name would sometimes surface in her mind, reminding her of her first love and the heartbreak it brought. This continued until that unforgettable spring of 1995. The sun, shining through the fresh green leaves, bathed the university campus in warmth. Miriam, slender with a cascade of chestnut hair, was hurrying to a lecture on structural mechanics. Her vibrant blue dress highlighted her fair skin and dark, expressive eyes. She had never been a conventional beauty, but there was something about her, an allure, a mystery, that captivated those around her. And it was on that spring day that she met him, Sam Taylor. He appeared as if straight from the pages of her favorite novel, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing trendy jeans and a leather jacket. His eyes had an irresistible depth and carried a quiet, indescribable sadness. "Excuse me, could you tell me where room 317 is?" he asked, slightly embarrassed. "Yes, of course. Just go straight, then turn left." "It's at the end of the hallway," Miriam replied, smiling unintentionally. Her voice sounded a little uncertain, but at the same time simple and sincere. And there wasn't the slightest hint of stuttering. "Thank you, Nancy Pittman." Sam smiled back, and his smile, bright and joyful, like a ray of sunshine on a cloudy day, lit up her heart. "Thanks," he said, and hurried off in the direction she had pointed. Miriam, left standing there, felt a spark of happiness for the first time in a long while. She couldn't quite understand what had attracted her to this stranger, but for some reason, his image wouldn't leave her mind. From that day on, their relationship began to grow, setting the foundation for the life they would share together. Of course, there was much to come, camping trips, outings, and every date they had was like a celebration, full of tenderness, sincerity, and deep emotion. Sam came from a relatively well-off family. His father managed a wholesale vegetable warehouse in the suburbs. But despite his position, Kenneth remained a simple and humble man until the end of his short life, never boasting about his status. Sam, too, didn't flaunt his family's wealth. Especially since, in the 1990s, a different kind of pursuit was gaining popularity: commerce and entrepreneurship. For her part, Miriam opened her heart to Sam. She told him about her dreams and hopes. She longed for a large, close-knit family, a comfortable life where love and understanding would reign supreme. Sam always listened attentively, and his heart resonated with the words of his bride. At that time, he still felt like he had found his destiny, the woman he loved more than life itself. But their happiness would soon face a harsh test. Sam's mother, Beatrice, had been against the marriage from the very start. She didn't think Miriam was good enough for her son. "Sam, are you blind?" "That girl is only after your money," hissed Beatrice when Sam introduced Miriam to her for the first time. That evening, Sam was deeply upset by his mother's behavior. He loved Miriam and wasn't about to listen to anyone's negative opinions. "Mom, please don't talk about Miriam like that. She's a good person, and we love each other." Beatrice, feeling offended by her son's defiance, decided to take matters into her own hands. She began spreading rumors about Miriam, speaking poorly of her, and trying to influence other family members against the relationship. Miriam sensed that Sam's mother didn't accept her, and while she tried to ignore Beatrice's cruel remarks, the constant disdain hurt deeply. "Sam, I can't take this anymore. It's so hard to endure your mother's contempt. She's constantly meddling in our relationship," Miriam said, tears welling up in her eyes. Sam held her tightly and promised to resolve the situation. He loved Miriam and couldn't bear to see her suffer. "Don't worry, I'll talk to my mom. She'll understand that I'm more serious about you than I've ever been." But the conversation with Beatrice didn't change anything. She remained firmly against their relationship, continuing to sabotage their bond. Despite all her efforts to drive them apart, Miriam and Sam married. The wedding was modest but filled with warmth and love. Only close friends and family attended the intimate ceremony. Afterward, the newlyweds rented a small apartment in one of the city's residential districts. Those early years were filled with love and hope, despite the challenges. The mid-1990s were difficult times for the country. Miriam, who had trained as a process engineer, struggled to find a job in her field. Factories were laying off workers by the hundreds, entire teams being dismissed as businesses crumbled. "Miriam, I can't support us forever. You need to find a job," Sam said one day in frustration. His words weren't a surprise to Miriam. She had long known that she needed to find a way to contribute financially. Determined, she decided to switch careers and enrolled in a hairdressing course offered by the local employment center. After 3 months of training, she was ready to start a new chapter. "Hello, I'd like to apply for a job here," she said, walking into a small salon. "All right, dear. Fill out this application. If everything checks out, we'll add you to the team," the owner replied. The salon wasn't much: old furniture, dirty mirrors, and a general air of neglect, but Miriam was grateful for any opportunity. Times were tough, and just having a job was a victory. She quickly learned how to cut and style hair, and she found joy in the work, especially in making people feel more beautiful. "Miriam, you're such a talented stylist. You create amazing hairstyles. I think one day you'll even be able to open your own salon," her colleague Barbara said to her one day. Miriam initially took Barbara's words as a joke, but she soon realized her colleague was serious. "Miriam, I think we should buy this hair salon. I'll help you. I have some savings, and we can open our own salon together." Miriam stared at her in surprise. Was this for real? She thought long and hard about it. Eventually, she agreed and began saving money. Miriam worked tirelessly, taking on extra clients at home, all while dreaming of the day when she would finally open her own business. A year later, they were able to buy the salon. The first thing they did was renovate: new furniture, new equipment. The transformation was incredible, and the salon quickly became one of the most popular in town. And things didn't stop there. Soon after, Miriam and Barbara opened a cafe by the waterfront, followed by a couple of car repair shops in the city center, and the first computer shop in town. Miriam was happy. What more could she ask for? A job she loved, a caring husband, and a future full of bright possibilities. Not long after, Miriam became pregnant. She was overjoyed, and Sam shared in her happiness. They dreamed of raising their child together, reading bedtime stories, and taking long walks as a family. But fate, cruel as ever, had another test in store for them. Miriam lost the baby in the 8th month. The premature birth was difficult, and the baby was stillborn. She lay in the hospital, unable to comprehend why such a tragedy had befallen her. "Miriam, I'm so sorry you had to go through all this. I'll always be here for you, no matter what, Sam reassured her, holding her hand. But doubt had crept into Miriam's heart, especially since Sam had missed her discharge from the hospital the previous day. His explanation had been shockingly simple. He'd gotten drunk with friends on a fishing trip. "Where were you?" Miriam asked, her voice filled with indignation. "I'm sorry, honey. I didn't mean to hurt you. We just had a bit too much to drink with the guys. You don't even realize what you've done. I don't want to see you. Leave me alone, go back to your mother." Sam's indifference to the loss of their child plunged Miriam into a long, deep depression. And, of course, Beatrice didn't miss the opportunity to add salt to the wound. "I warned you, you wouldn't be able to carry a child. You're barren. This is all your fault. An empty vessel is just that, empty. You never should have come into our lives." Miriam couldn't take it anymore. She fainted from the stress, haunted by nightmares where she saw her dead child and blamed herself for everything. In that dark moment, she decided to end it all, to put an end to the unbearable pain. Without a word, she dressed and walked to the bridge. The rushing river below had always fascinated her, its slow-moving waves whispering strange phrases in a language only they seemed to understand. "From water we came, and to water we'll return," Miriam whispered as she gripped the cold rail of the bridge. "Hey, what are you doing, girl?" came a raspy voice from behind her. Miriam opened her eyes, startled. Standing before her was Glenn Powell, the elderly janitor from the local kindergarten, holding her by the hand. "Let me go. I don't want to live anymore. You shouldn't do this. You have your whole life ahead of you." When my son came back in a zinc coffin, I rethought a lot of things. I didn't believe it was true at first, but then I accepted it. I used to work as a master at a vocational school, but then I became a janitor, getting closer to the kids at the kindergarten so my soul would feel more at peace. My Paul is watching from heaven. I know he's looking down and smiling. Sometimes he visits me in my dreams. He complained recently, saying it's cold up there. So, I went to church right away, ordered a service, and arranged a memorial dinner. So there you have it, dear. And you say there's no reason to live. Please, my girl, don't do this. Don't. After hearing these words, Miriam broke down in tears, sobbing like a child. She felt utterly shattered. That day, Glenn helped her get home, where she spent several days in bed, unable to get up. "Miriam, you shouldn't have done that. You need to get up and keep living. You must understand that you're not alone. I love you and will always be here," Sam said, trying to calm her while obviously overdoing it. But Miriam couldn't rekindle the old feelings. Every day, she remembered the loss of her child, and her heart was filled with emotional pain. She realized that she could no longer live as she once had. It was time to find a new path and a new purpose in life. Surprisingly, Miriam began to keep a diary. Secretly, of course, especially from her mother-in-law, who by that time, having buried her husband, had become increasingly ill. Over time, the pain of losing her child began to ease slightly. Miriam learned to live with that pain. It became a part of her life. Moreover, she discovered that she was not alone in her tragedy. There were others who had also experienced the pain of loss. As she honed her writing skills, Miriam suddenly realized that she had inadvertently found her calling. No, business and money were merely means to an end. Her true passion lay in creativity. Initially tentative and uncertain, her writing grew strong and profound. Miriam started writing short stories and novellas. Her first piece was about a woman who, like her, had lost a child. In this story, Miriam expressed all her pain and reopened her emotional wounds. Miriam, this is an amazing story. You are a talented author, and you can write things that will touch people deeply. Gaining confidence, Miriam continued to create. Each of her stories focused on women, their lives, love, and pain. Her works gained immense popularity online. Critics hailed Miriam Taylor as a talented author, while readers said her books helped them cope with life. Her stories were even translated into other languages. However, this didn't particularly affect Miriam because her craft didn't bring in much money. She needed it only as an outlet. And she found that outlet in her books. One day, she saw an ad in the newspaper. A local orphanage needed sponsorship for building repairs and improvements to the surrounding areas. "Sam, how about we adopt a child from the orphanage?" Miriam proposed hopefully, knowing she could never get pregnant again. A tense silence filled the room. Frankly speaking, her husband didn't want to adopt a child and was afraid it would be too difficult. But Miriam didn't give up, even though she wasn't entirely sure she could love someone else's child. Yet she also understood that Sam needed support and she herself needed something to help her survive. "All right," he agreed, "but let's choose together." They visited several orphanages, where Miriam looked at the children with pain and compassion. And finally, she saw him, William, a 5-year-old boy with big, dark eyes that gazed at the world with an unexplainable fear. "Let's adopt him. He's such a sweet little boy," Miriam said. "He clearly needs us." Sam reluctantly agreed, although he feared that William wouldn't fit into their family. "Miriam, I honestly have my doubts," he said. "He seems so sullen, and he looks at us strangely." "Well, decide for yourself." "Let's give it a try, Sam," Miriam pleaded. "We need to help him." Sam waved his hand in resignation and began preparing the necessary paperwork. William quickly bonded with Miriam and, from the very first days, called her Mama. He felt her warmth and love. Sam, on the other hand, remained cold and somewhat distant. In his wife's opinion, he hadn't been able to overcome his pain and the loss of their child. William grew up spoiled and disobedient, doing whatever he wanted. Miriam tried to raise her son, but she found herself powerless against his whims. "Mom, I want a toy," he shouted, stomping his foot in the toy section of the department store. "William, you shouldn't behave like that," she admonished him. "We can't buy every toy that catches your eye." "But I want this one," the boy screamed, tears streaming down his cheeks. Sam was completely helpless when it came to parenting because he didn't know how to deal with children. "Miriam," he sighed sadly, "maybe we should return William to the orphanage?" "Sam, what are you saying?" "Don't even think about it," she replied firmly. "We can't just abandon him. He's not a toy. Please, put aside your pride and understand that we won't have another son." She spent a long time convincing her husband, explaining that the child needed love. "Please, Sam. Let's give this little boy a chance at happiness." Sam eventually gave in and dumped all the responsibilities on her, the business, raising their son, and even taking care of his sick mother. In recent years, Beatrice had become particularly ill. Her once cold and piercing eyes were now dull and lifeless. Despite all her grievances, Miriam cared for her mother-in-law for about 2 years. She took care of her, cooked meals, and even read books to her when she was troubled by severe pain. Deep down, Miriam felt that Beatrice needed her very much, even if she wouldn't say so out of pride and self-absorption. One evening, while Miriam was sitting by her mother-in-law's bedside, Beatrice suddenly grabbed her daughter-in-law's hand tightly, squeezing it so hard that Miriam gasped. "Miriam, forgive me." "For what are you asking forgiveness?" "For everything, my dear. For the harm I caused you. You see, I switched your baby. In reality, the child was alive. I bribed the midwife, and she brought you the dead baby of an alcoholic." The words of her mother-in-law hit Miriam like a thunderclap. She froze, as if rooted to the spot, and her mind refused to accept this information. "What? You're lying. This can't be true." "No, Miriam, it's the truth. I'm a monster. I did everything to ensure you would never become a mother. I wanted you to suffer and leave Sam's life forever. And now I pray to God that he grants you many years of family life. Please forgive me," Beatrice whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But where is he? Where's my child?" Miriam couldn't hold back. "I don't know, my dear. I gave him to an orphanage." Yes, I ruined your life and wanted you to live with that pain. Forgive me, the mother-in-law whispered quietly, closing her eyes and never opening them again. After Beatrice passed away, Miriam was left alone with this horrifying secret. She didn't know what to do but was filled with hope to find her child. Sam, who turned to heavy drinking after his mother's death, didn't believe her story, attributing it to hallucinations caused by the strong painkillers. Their high school-aged son William thought that his grandmother had developed dementia before her death and that her words couldn't be trusted. Despite her husband and son's skepticism, Miriam began her investigation. Day and night, she searched for information about the midwife who had been bribed by her mother-in-law. She eagerly pursued any leads that could help her find a trace. It was difficult. Miriam faced many obstacles. People refused to help her, fearing possible criminal charges. But she didn't give up. She knew she had to find her son. Eventually, Miriam tracked down the fateful midwife, Deborah Simmons. By that time, Deborah had become partially paralyzed and could only move around the nursing home in a wheelchair. However, the midwife remembered everything. Yes, I switched the baby, Deborah said. Beatrice paid me a lot of money. She said her son should be the only heir. I needed that amount to buy a summer house. I bought the house, but it burned down a year later. But where is my child? Miriam asked. He was adopted, the midwife replied faintly, but I don't know who did it. Miriam was devastated. At that moment, it felt as though she would never find her child. Come on, it's all nonsense. Two old ladies made up some story, and you believed them. Let's go choose a car for William from the catalog for college, her husband expressed his opinion. But Miriam wasn't going to give up. 6 months before the diagnosis of her serious illness, she consulted a lawyer, Jonathan Collins, who was also a volunteer looking for missing persons. With great difficulty in keeping her emotions in check, Miriam told him everything she knew. I can try to find the records in the orphanage archives, but it will be quite difficult. So many years have passed, the lawyer said. Miriam was ready to wait forever, her heart filled with both hope and fear. But what if she didn't find her son? What if he didn't want to see her? What if? Jonathan called her a few weeks after the investigation began. I found him. Miriam's hands trembled. Finally, her beloved son. Sam would be so happy. And where is he? Miriam asked breathlessly. The lawyer paused for a long moment, clearly preparing her for something unpleasant. I'm sorry to say this, Miriam, but your son died in a fire at the orphanage. Part of the records was destroyed. I'll send you the location of the grave in a photo report. I'm so sorry it turned out this way. Are you sure it's my son? The midwife said he was adopted. Miriam exclaimed, teetering on the brink of fainting. Jonathan hesitated. Well, I'm not God, I can't know everything for certain, but all the documents point to this. And Deborah, how should I put it, she had some confusion due to her old age. The last time I saw her, she was talking to her cat and asking it for advice on her will. Can you imagine? She believed the cat would help her with inheritance matters. Well, when I saw her, she was still quite coherent, Miriam said timidly. The lawyer sighed sadly. If you insist, I can continue the search, completely free of charge. It's not that difficult for me. Miriam nodded in agreement, then, after hanging up the phone, covered her face with her hands. Sam quietly entered the room and shook his head. Stop torturing yourself over nonsense. Your mother made up some nonsense and waved it off, and you've been unable to find peace for years. Why don't you go make something to eat? I'm starving. I keep eating and eating, but I can't get full. Miriam remained silent and, wiping away her tears, went to the kitchen. Cooking again. And on top of that, there was the business, cleaning, laundry, ironing, and dealing with William's problems at the university. Was this the life she had dreamed of while sitting on a park bench with Donald? Yes, she had become a servant to her husband and son. Look at Sam, He can't even tie his own tie and still wants to run a business. He picked up some fancy words and jibbles them around as he pleases. Oh, what's the use of saying anything more? Her son was no better. He got into a fight at the disco and ripped the dormitory supervisor's sweater. Now he wants a rental apartment with all the conveniences, and it should have at least 3 rooms. And a jacuzzi and a flat-screen TV on the wall. What does he care about that scholarship? It was different back in the day when Miriam saved every penny during her student years, lived on next to nothing, and spent her nights poring over textbooks. What was the point of her education if not for this? She was pulled from her sad thoughts by the sound of a door opening. A caregiver stood in the doorway. "Excuse me, is it okay? They asked me to adjust your mattress so you don't get bed sores. It sometimes turns off by itself after each cycle. I'm sorry to come in like this. It's just that it can be tough for the girls," Jeff mumbled, embarrassed. Miriam smiled. "It's all right, everything is fine. They can carry me around now, if they want." The young man blushed and began to carry out his task. Miriam watched his precise and deliberate movements, lost in her own thoughts. Of course, Sam was counting on her to leave this world soon and for him to inherit, otherwise, he would never allow himself such extravagances as buying jewelry for his mistress. It seems he's completely lost his fear. Doesn't fear anything. Well, Sam, we'll see whose will prevails. You and William won't get my money. You've gotten too smart for your own good. Time to call the notary and make changes to my will. We'll see how they sing then. I've suffered enough in 20 years. Let them fend for themselves now, Miriam thought to herself with a smile. William has indeed gotten quite bold lately. He doesn't leave the nightclubs, and it seems he intends to take his exams there, too. What if I cut off his access to money? And Sam's too, while I'm at it. What am I, a piggy bank? Miriam thought and asked Jeff to get her smartphone from the bedside table and dial a number from her contact list for a video call. The bank manager, Bobby Marshall, quickly got up to speed and was incredibly happy to hear that Miriam was alive and not planning to leave this world. After listening to his VIP client, the banker immediately froze William's and Sam's accounts. All this time, Jeff patiently stood by, waiting for the patient to finish her call. When Miriam finally finished giving instructions to the banker and notary, Jeff let out a sigh of relief. After pausing for a moment, the caregiver cautiously remarked, "Miriam, the doctor who voted against disconnecting you from the machines is coming to see you. He came to us from abroad to share his experience, so to speak, but he was born and raised in our country. You'll see for yourself shortly." Miriam looked at Jeff with concern. "Could we maybe do this another time? I'm not exactly a beauty, and it feels a bit awkward. I could use a moment to collect myself." Jeff shrugged and, without saying a word, left the room. Miriam took a deep breath. Well, now no one would come for sure. Why was this foreigner so eager to be here? Each country has its own medicine. Was it really nostalgia for his homeland? At that moment, the sound of the door opening pulled Miriam out of her half-daze. She turned her head anxiously toward the entrance. The door swung open silently, and a tall man in his mid-40s stepped into the room. He had kind and slightly sad eyes. The doctor was dressed in a pristine white coat that highlighted his athletic figure. Miriam froze, struck to the core. Her heart felt like it would leap out of her chest. She was breathless. It was Donald, her first love, the school prince, the one she knew almost everything about. She remembered his light, slightly mocking smile, the dimples on his cheeks when he laughed, and the warmth of his hands as he helped her climb the steep stairs at school. "Donald?" Miriam whispered. The visitor smiled, and that smile was just like the one she remembered from so many years ago. "Miriam, you're awake. How are you feeling?" Donald's voice sounded slightly hoarse, with a barely noticeable accent that she hadn't noticed before. I don't understand how this happened," she stammered, unable to tear her eyes away from Donald's face. I became a doctor, Miriam. I came from Switzerland for a few months to help the local hospital, Donald said with a bittersweet smile. Life is full of surprises. She stood frozen, unable to utter a single word. Donald, who had seemed forever lost in her past, was now standing right in front of her. Not only that, he had become a doctor, found success, and moved abroad. I thought you. Miriam faltered, unsure how to phrase her question to address the pain of their years apart. Yes, Miriam, life hasn't been easy for me either. I lost my wife a few years ago in a car accident. I have 2 wonderful twin daughters, Karen and Anne. They're 10 now. I became a father late, yes. My wife struggled to get pregnant. Even with the advances in their medicine, it can still be a problem at times. Donald spoke calmly, but in his gaze, Miriam noticed a longing, the very same longing she had carried in her heart all these years. Miriam listened silently, absorbing every word and trying to understand how her friend's life had unfolded. I'm so glad you're alive, Donald said, his voice dropping as if he feared startling a fragile butterfly with his breath. In Donald's words, she felt something more than just friendly joy. By the way he looked at her, his intonations, his manner of speaking, she understood that Donald still loved her and had all these years. At that moment, Miriam remembered their first meeting outside the speech therapist's office, the school dance where he, tall and handsome, casually invited her to dance. The eyes of that teenager, filled with light and kindness, mesmerized her. She had fallen in love unconditionally, boundlessly. Miriam spent several days in the hospital. Donald was constantly by her side, caring for her as if she were the most precious treasure. Miriam, you need to gradually return to normal life. Don't overload yourself, and finally stop thinking about your husband. I've made inquiries. Sam is convinced you don't have much time left and has run off with his girlfriend to the seaside, Donald said, adjusting her pillow. I wish I could be with you, Miriam whispered, looking at him with love. And I want to be with you, always, Donald replied, taking her hand in his. Miriam was discharged from the hospital after 3 weeks. In that time, Sam had learned a lot about himself, including receiving notice of their divorce and facing serious financial problems due to the blocking of his cards. Until then, her husband had been using the remaining cash and didn't realize that he was actually bankrupt. William had been expelled from university for poor academic performance, and now he was facing military service. However, Miriam didn't worry about that. If she and her husband hadn't managed to raise their son into a man, perhaps the harsh army instructors could do it. Who knows? Despite still feeling weak, a flame of hope for their future relationship burned in her heart. Donald had offered her to live with him. Well, not exactly with him, but in the house of his late parents. My daughters, Karen and Anne, can't wait to meet you, Donald said, gently taking her hand. Miriam agreed almost immediately. She wanted to be closer to him and to his love. The house turned out to be quite cozy, filled with the scent of home. Karen and Anne were so sweet and kind that Miriam immediately loved them with all her heart. It's so great that you're with us now, Aunt Miriam, Karen said, hugging her. Tears shimmered in Miriam's eyes. Deep down, she had never thought her life could change so dramatically. If it weren't for the misfortunes, she wouldn't have found happiness. You girls are wonderful, she exclaimed, embracing the twins. They spent their evenings together. Donald talked about his life in Germany, his work, his dreams and plans for the future related to opening a private clinic, but here, in his homeland. Miriam shared her memories, joys, and sorrows with him. I'm so happy you're in my life. I've never stopped loving you, Donald confessed. And I love you very, very much, Miriam replied. She quickly adapted to her new life, helping Donald around the house, caring for the children, and becoming a real mother to them. The family spent a lot of time together. They took walks in the parks, went to the theater and movies, and read books. Mom, tell us a fairy tale, Karen and Aunt asked as they settled down for the night. Miriam happily read to her daughters. She enjoyed being with them, feeling their warmth and love. The divorce from Sam went almost painlessly. Her husband tried to negotiate a division of property but ended up with just a summer cottage in a gardening association and an old car that he had been driving during the divorce proceedings. Betty immediately left him, especially since the necklace Sam had given her turned out to be nothing but cheap costume jewelry intended to create a false impression. Miriam didn't abandon William. She opened a bank account in his name, but with one condition: he could only access the money, which was set aside for several years, after getting married, having a child, or finding a job. Initially, her adopted son was very offended by her, but then he accepted it and even managed to get reinstated at the university. Miriam could only guess how much that cost her son since he didn't want to study at all. Jeff called his former patient from time to time to check on her, and one day he even came to visit, bringing a homeless puppy he had found by a dumpster. Karen and immediately grabbed the little one and rushed to feed and bathe him. That evening, they had a great time together: Donald, the girls, Miriam, and Jeff. Unlike everyone else, the young attendant felt uncomfortable and kept glancing at the hostess of the house as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the courage. Miriam tried to engage him in conversation a couple of times, but he behaved awkwardly and, not wanting to pursue the topic, shifted his attention to the puppy, which the twins had already named Bonnie. The next morning, Miriam was awakened by a phone call. The interrupter was her lawyer, who clearly had some information. Otherwise, why would he be calling her 2 months after their last unsuccessful conversation? Miriam, hopeful, leaned closer to the receiver. "Good morning, Miriam. I have very good news for you." She froze in astonishment. "What is it?" "Your son has been found, alive," the lawyer corrected himself immediately. "How alive?" "You said he." Miriam gasped in fear. "He's alive, and he's closer than you think. Please look out the window, and you'll see him with your own eyes," Jonathan said, cheerfully. On shaky legs, Miriam approached the window and jerked the heavy curtain aside. Her heart raced, threatening to leap from her chest. Right outside her window stood a smiling Jeff, holding a huge bouquet of roses. It turned out that he had learned just yesterday that Miriam was his biological mother, but for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. All evening, he had trembled with excitement, like a trembling aspen leaf. This morning, he gathered his courage, and with Jonathan's support, he attempted again, this time successfully. Tears shimmered in Miriam's eyes as her son burst into the living room and threw his arms around her. Birds sang in her heart, and she felt as if she were soaring like a fairy from a storybook. After all, they say life only begins at 40. By 50, you truly start to understand the taste of life. If you enjoyed the story, please support it with a like and a comment. All the best to you.